Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Denver Dzogchen Podcast. I'm your host, Damien, here with Joe, and we are starting a new series. So we just finished the Four Thoughts That Turn the Mind Toward the Dharma, which is sometimes known as the outer Ngondro or the outer preliminaries. So we figure it would be auspicious and positive to now go into the inner Ngondro, which most people are familiar when they hear the word Ngondro. This is what they think of. Refuge, Bodhichitta, Prostrations, Vajrasattva, all of that. So we'll start off today with kind of a general introduction to Ngondro and why these practices are important, because there's a bit of a controversy. There's some teachers who really emphasize them, and you have to do all the 100,000s and you have to complete them before you receive further teachings. And other teachers don't think it's as important. And so today, Joe and I can kind of discuss our feelings about it and what the tradition has to say, and hopefully you enjoy it. Joe, how's it going?
Going well. Hello, Damien. Hello, everyone. Happy to be here. Happy to talk about Ngondro. I think the Ngondro, I'm personally in the camp that it's important to do and definitely an auspicious thing. So we'll talk about it and see where it takes us.
Sounds good to me. Yeah, for me, I was just told this is what you got to do, so I just did it, and I don't regret it at all. It made a massive, for me, it entrenched me into practice. It entrenched me into Dharma in a way that, when you push yourself to do something really, really hard, everything else gets easier. And if you do the Ngondro, then all the other practices you'll have to do or should do in the path becomes so much easier. And it's so much easier to commit time and to do retreats and long sessions, all these things that can be really hard. If people take the time and work through the Ngondro, the rest of the path just gets so much easier, in my opinion.
I think that's absolutely true. But to back up just one step, what is the Ngondro? Ngondro just means preliminary. Preliminary to what and why is it important? Preliminary to what are considered the main practices of Vajrayana, primarily the visualization of a Yidam deity, your tutelary deity. And that can be done while you are the deity or the deities outside of you. There's various things we'll probably talk about at some point in the future. But in order to form a foundation for that and to make it likely that it will be effective in transforming one's experience of oneself and of the world and of others, then these preliminary practices have been put into place. It's at least a few hundred years ago that this became a popular thing and is now, as far as I know, in all the schools, including Bun even has an Ngondro. But as you said earlier, in more recent times, maybe with regard primarily to the Dharma in the West, some teachers have decided that, hey, this isn't that important. And although they may give the opportunity to their students to do it, they don't push it as hard these days. So maybe we can rejuvenate some interest in it.
Yeah. I think that, of course, it's not like a magic formula that if you didn't do these specific things, there's no way you could access the higher truths of Dharma. But I think that it is a highly effective training system. So why not? To me, it's like, of course, maybe there are people who don't need it, or maybe there are other ways to go about it. But it is a tried and true system that I think, because it works on so many levels, including a physical level and a verbal level and a mental level, to really train your body-mind complex to work with visualization, to connect to devotion, to connect to what it feels like to purify, to connect to what it feels like to accumulate merit. These things are really subtle. And when you do this many of them, it really familiarizes your system to them in a way that I think is just tried and true and a reliable way of having a solid foundation for further practice.
Well, I agree. And we can talk a little more about why the Ngondro is important and why people who are, maybe on the fence about whether to do it or not should, strongly consider making it part of their practice. But maybe before we talk about that, we just say what it actually is for those people who aren't familiar. Sometimes the Ngondro is broken into 4 parts, sometimes broken into 5 parts. Traditionally, 5 parts is the way. And the first part is the recitation of a formula for taking refuge. In Vajrayana, just like in all of our traditions of Buddhism, we take refuge in the 3 gems, the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. And then in Vajrayana, we also take refuge in our own teacher, the Lama, the Guru. So these 4 refuges are the first part, and very frequently that's combined with physical prostrations, which are to bow yourself down to the ground and go from a standing position to a completely prone position over and over. And usually in traditional Ngondros, that's done 100,000 times, plus a little extra to make up for ones that you didn't do completely well. So the first part is the refuge, and that is usually combined with the prostrations, although that sometimes is combined with other parts of the Ngondro. It depends on the tradition. The second part is the recitation of a formula of Bodhichitta, which is a condensed way of saying, not just for me am I doing this, but for all beings. And that is, crucial aspect of the Mahayana. It's what distinguishes the Mahayana from other paths. And usually you do that just in a seated position. Sometimes the prostrations are done with that part, but most frequently with the refuge. Then you do a purification practice of recitation of the long Vajrasattva mantra, although again, in some Ngondros, it's just a short Om Vajrasattva A or Om Vajrasattva Hung, but usually as you do the long recitation with a visualization of Vajrasattva above your head and nectar streaming down to purify you and so forth, that's very, very powerful. Once that's done, which you also recite about 100,000 times, once that's done, you make a symbolic offering of the universe, which is called a Mandala offering, which is combined with a physical representation. You have a little plate, you put special stones and oftentimes rice or other grain on the plate in a certain way and offer that again and again to the Lama, to the lineage, to the protectors, to all of the Buddhas of the past in order to gain merit. And then finally, you practice a form of unification of your mind with the mind of your teacher, which is called Guru Yoga. And those 5 parts together, sometimes refuge and bodhicitta are combined into one. Those 5 or 4 parts, done 100,000 times or so each, constitutes this Ngondro. For most people in the West who don't have full-time or not full-time practitioners, this takes anywhere from 18 months if you're really dedicated to 3 years, maybe 4 years. People in our group, it seems about the average is about 2.5 or 3 years. Depends on whether you stay focused and stuff and so forth, and how much time you can devote per day. But if you can devote between an hour and 2 hours per day, you can get it done in 2 years or so, depending on whether your physical constitution holds up against the prostrations, which is really the hard part for most people in the beginning, although many people stumble on other parts. And this process takes you, in my personal experience, which I'll give my own, the way that it happened to me, it takes you from being a quote unquote ordinary person to being a real practitioner, meaning that you have a daily meditation practice that's at least an hour long, that you understand the basics of what you were talking about with visualization and other techniques. And also it has the aim of transforming both your goals in this life into Dharma goals, which they're normally completely samsaric goals, and turning you into someone who has the Dharma more or less uppermost in their mind. I think these are the real outcomes of doing it well, or even doing it poorly seems to have that effect for most people. And for that reason, it's definitely something not to discard, almost no matter what your individual lineage says. It's always definitely worth considering.
Yeah, I totally agree. And forgive me, my internet's being a little unstable. So if it cuts out here, then that's why. So yeah, and one way I've learned to look at Ngondro that I think is helpful is that it's really 4 different forms of Guru Yoga. In so many ways, this is all about uniting with the Lama, and what does that really mean? It's a connection to our highest nature, right? So we're working on that connection in a way that we actually begin to recognize what we project onto somewhere out there. We're starting to own it in ourselves. And that all the Vajrayana and all the Dzogchen teachings emphasize the importance of Guru Yoga. And of course, people think Guru Yoga and they immediately think of, a person that's your guru. And that's, of course, part of it as an outer element of this. But Guru Yoga really is so much more in the sense that it's about connecting, as I said, to your highest and truest self that you already exists now, but it's something we don't identify with. And in order to connect to that, we have to have faith. And this is why I think in a lot of ways, Ngondro is even more important for Westerners than it is for the Tibetans, because we don't necessarily automatically have faith in the Buddha and Buddha nature or anything like that. Our faith can be kind of fickle and thin and intellectually based. And that's not always the most reliable foundation for a spiritual path. We really have to have confidence. And that's like faith and confidence should be almost interchangeable terms. This isn't blind faith. This isn't belief. This is faith through experience, having some intimation of it through having tasted it and growing that confidence over time. So really by doing these practices, we're making sure that that faith is unshakable faith so that we are really certain what we're working with. And then the rest of the practices become effective.
Of course, you're absolutely right. I think that what you're talking about is, of course, the crucial aspect of it, but there are actually outer aspects that people might relate to more. And so we should probably cover those a little bit before we go into the deepening of faith, because from a Buddhist perspective, it seems to me that our orientation toward the world itself, previous to meeting a teacher or being interested in meditation or whatever brought you to the path, is one of getting ahead in samsara, more or less fixing samsara. Samsara is the cycle of birth and death in all of its manifestations in our world, not just physical death of the body, but the death of all of the things that go on in our world. Everything is quite impermanent. And this is a fact, but it is also easily overlooked in our modern world, where we just think, well, I'm just not trying hard enough. I'm just not organized enough. I'm just not rich enough or whatever. And by adjusting certain things, I can make my life smooth. I can make my life happy. I can make my life fulfilling. From a Buddhist perspective, this is a wrong view and is actually impossible to accomplish. And I think that the basis of the Ngondro is not only to increase your faith, which of course it absolutely is, but it's to reorient your view of your life from a kind of what we would probably call a wrong view, which is that samsara is repairable, to a right view, which is that outlook is itself faulty and is a source of suffering. That change of the focus of one's life is the real purpose of the Ngondro that I see in an outer way as a preliminary thing. It's to reorient over and over toward a Dharma view of the world rather than a completely samsaric view, which is just, I need more money. I want a better life. I'm going to be happy. I can break through. I can do it. This kind of orientation, which so many people, I mean, everyone naturally has. In order to refocus ourselves, that's what the Ngondro really does and really has as its basis.
Can you talk a little bit about the mechanics of that? Like, how do you see Ngondro orienting ourselves away from the eight worldly concerns?
It's a fairly subtle notion. I think that it comes to this idea that the reason that we see the world the way we do is because we have so many obscurations. Our view is obscured by concerns based on the idea that I am the most important thing in the universe, which we have as a natural view. We just think, I'm over here and I exist and everything else exists in a different way than I do. I am the most important. And the real goal of the Mahayana is to change that around, right? Is to make others more important than oneself. And the very foundation of that is to remove the obscurations that we have developed over time that prevent us from seeing things as they actually are. And how are they really? They're really impermanent, and they're really empty in a sense of real value and meaning in many cases. And we don't see that. We instead overlay on our worldly life a sense of importance and meaning that it doesn't actually have. And that the mechanism through that we do that through is because of building up more and more obscurations, like wearing a certain type of glasses that force us to see the world in a certain way. So one aspect of the Ngondro is to remove those obscurations, remove those glasses, and start to see things as they actually are. And then the other reason that we get stuck in this kind of low-level view of the world is because of we don't have enough merit. We don't have enough virtue in our lives. We have spent our energy, our time, our psychic well-being entirely on getting more from me. And me, in this case, could also be my family or my community or something, but primarily me. And the interplay of obscurations and low-level merit forces us to see the world in a certain way. And in order to liberate ourselves from that, we need to gather the accumulations of merit and wisdom, and we need to purify our obscurations. And that's exactly what the Ngondro really does.
And I think that's such a beautiful point. And so when people hear in Vajrayana, most people know that it has a lot to do with quote unquote visualization. And people often think like, why am I imagining things? Or I have a hard time imagining things, or visualizing is hard for me. But I think what you're saying is an important point. We already are visualizing something. We are visualizing a samsaric world. We're projecting onto the world a set of ideas and ways of seeing things and beings already. And that Buddhism is saying what we're projecting is really wrong. And we can have a better projection. That would be the Vajrayana, or eventually we can let go of projection altogether. And that would be realization at the higher levels. So what a lot of Ngondro is doing is giving us a visualization that's maybe more accurate or more in line with how things are. Is that a fair way of putting it?
It seems like it to me. Yeah. We have to be careful with the word wrong, not because it's not a good word to use, but because of its association with moral, right and wrong as a moral thing. This is not so much about that. This is about whether we are in alignment with the way things actually are or not. The whole of Buddhism is about seeing things clearly and acting from that basis. We can't even do that if we don't know what the real situation is. And we are, as you very nicely said, continuously visualizing, and which is really just imagining the world out of alignment with how it actually is. We think, yeah, everything's impermanent. Yeah, but that doesn't matter. What really matters is that if I try hard enough, I can make it permanent. Whether it is my job or my relationship or my children's lives or my wealth or my yard looking nice, whatever you're motivated to try to establish as permanent. And this inability to see things as they actually are is a primary reason that we continue to go around and around. Buddhism is about freedom. It isn't about changing from one view to another. That doesn't matter as much as what really matters is clearing away those things which prevent us from experiencing things as they actually are at a deeper and deeper level for the good of ourselves and the good of others. And so long as we are trying to to use a common statement, fit a round peg in a square hole, we will never be happy. We will never be fulfilled. So the first aspect of the Ngondro, which, manifests as the prostrations and so forth, is about clearing away those old views, at least to some degree, starting to giving ourselves the permission and building up the the muscles, the psychic muscles that allow us to see things how they actually are. And that's the first part. And then the second part is to gain the ability to live in that more and more. And that's what visualization is really about. We're not just overlaying a nice view of things over a crappy view and hoping that it'll stick. We're actually removing the crappy view, seeing its faults, and then starting to see things clearly, which is less like visualization and more like just clear seeing, like vipassana, as it's called in Sanskrit.
Yeah, what we're really bound by are concepts, right? Like we like to label everything like that's the wall and that's my wife and that's a convenient way of getting through the world and is important and necessary as a stage of development. We have to have this ability, but then the problem becomes these simple labels never encapsulate what things really are because things are always changing and things are impermanent and things aren't ever one thing. So when my wife doesn't act the way I expect her to, then I get frustrated because she's not fitting into the category that I've put on her as wife. And so the same thing happens to us constantly, that that I exist in a solid permanent way and this body should therefore not get sick. It should not break down. Should not get old and die. And the people around me should conform to my perspective of the world and how it should be. These concepts and labels prevent us from a direct experience of how things are. And so we're constantly being frustrated because things don't live up to our concept.
Of course, you're absolutely right. It's true that we overlay the world with our thinking. That is true. That's very hard to attack directly, which is I guess we can talk a little bit about the why of the Ngondro and the benefits of it in this context. Some teachers, especially in recent years, last 20 years or so, have said like, Ngondro is not that important. What's really important is the true meditation state of Trekcho, or whatever you want to call it, recognizing Rigpa, the nature of mind. And from a certain perspective, of course, that is true. But the actual doing of that is a lot more challenging for people if they still have so many obscurations, so many, which are just habits, right? It's just the habits of seeing things in a certain way, being told by the media, and which is, an arm of the sales force of the world, trying to sell us things, and it'll be better if you have this, or if you don't have that, or if your hair is different, or whatever. We develop habits, psychic habits that we can't even see anymore. They're so part of us. So clearing those away to some degree, or at least poking holes in them to the degree we can while still maintaining a functional life. And then gathering the merit that allows us to see things more and more clearly is the real focus. So it isn't as opposed to a, say, direct attack on concepts, which would be, introducing the meditation state right from the beginning, saying that's all you need to do, which may be true for some type of people, but in my experience, very few people make progress going at it that way. My own teacher, Tulku Urgyen Rinpoche, he gave the instructions about the true meditation state right when you met him. At least he did to me and many, many others. And that was a long time ago for me now, and I have lots of friends who received it in that same way. I don't see people becoming Buddhas as a result of simply doing that. Usually the whole path is beneficial. And since so many people have done this, it might be valuable for others to do it. It was certainly valuable for me.
Yeah. Well, I think that what people get lost in is that the tradition in Vajrayana is always clear that things have an outer, inner, and secret level, and we need to work on all of them. And there's a tendency to think, well, if I have the secret innermost essence to this thing, then that's all I need to practice, and then everything else will open up. And maybe that would also be true, as you're saying, like in isolated retreat. If you did that and recognized that and then just sat there and did nothing but that for a long period of time, then maybe that would work. But since we're in, connected to constant activity and stimulation and interaction with appearances, then we need to work on all of these levels. And to me, Ngondro is a really effective and helpful way to work on all of these levels, from the most external setting up the ritual aspects, using our body to do prostrations, etc. We're actually working on a physical level to change our relationship to the physical world and our body, to an inner level of concepts and visualization, to the innermost level of the channels, and the energy in our body, and then even the essential core of the nature of mind. These are all in Ngondro. So it's not like we're leaving that essential core out and doing something else. We're working on a multi-tiered level of training so that we can bring our whole body mind complex into alignment with this truth.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's, I was thinking back to my own initial involvement in Vajrayana. I had been a practitioner of Zen. I had two different Zen teachers, and I had been doing that for about 5 years when I came in contact with the Vajrayana. And before I met Tulku Urgyen, I had read some Vajrayana instruction stuff, and I had a sense about the Ngondro, and I thought, I'm never going to do that. There's no chance. This kind of energy, right? And I was quite young at the time and pretty fit, and it wasn't that. It wasn't that I couldn't physically do it. I just had I was like, I'm beyond that already. And one meeting with Tulku Urgyen made me. I left that meeting with. I've told that story I think before, but I got my mind blown. And the outcome of that was I was like, here's someone I really want to be like. And when I asked him, what should I do? He said, well, you should do the Ngondro. That's what everyone does. And that was what you should do. And so it was very interesting to see how my mind changed. I went from being completely against, no way am I going to prostrate, what the heck? To I'm ready to start immediately. In fact, did start right then and ended up doing the Ngondro 4 times, which is insane, and still an ordinary person. Isn't that crazy? But it was the change that happened that really shocked me. I didn't expect it, right? Of course, I had a strong idea, but something in Tulku Urgyen's presence and in our connection poked a little hole in that, and through that I could see the sunlight of possibility. And it backed me up and gave me the freedom to think, I can do this. This is the right thing to do. And I am so grateful. I consider, in my life of 55 years, I consider that more of an accomplishment than getting a college degree, that's for sure. I really, it took a lot and in many years and a lot of dedicated focus and some serious physical and mental discomfort. And yet the payoff, although subtle, has been tremendous. And so I encourage all the people who I meet with to do the Ngondro. And no matter what their age is and no matter what their physical level is, you can always make adjustments for that.
Yeah. Well, as human beings, we're always looking for a shortcut, right? We want the easy path. But when we look at the tradition and we look at the great masters from Shakyamuni onwards, they all went through tremendous hardship for the faith for Dharma. When we look at he spent 7 years on the banks of Narajana River training in yoga, barely eating any food. This was an important part of his path. Although his realization wasn't quote unquote the result of those intense efforts were necessary for him to accept his realization. You look at Milarepa, same thing, Padmasambhava, all of the masters went through hardships. We have to have that discipline and difficult work towards realization. I don't think that that's something we can get around. The idea, there's the story of Chik Charwa, somebody who just realizes upon hearing Dzogchen instructions. I don't think this is something that is around anymore. And if it is, it's so rare that it's unbelievable. Because even in the Zen school, right, they train, they're quote unquote Ngondro. They have a certain kinds of dietary restrictions. They spend long hours sitting in lotus posture. All the Buddhist traditions with realized people, they go through hardship. And I don't think that that's an escapable part of the path. What are your thoughts on that?
I think that what probably happened in the early days, people had this, the people we think of, like Milarepa, they had a burning desire And as a result of that, they went through hardships just to receive the teachings. I mean, Milarepa, we think building those towers and tearing them down and huge sores on his back and all this business. If you think about someone like Naropa, Naropa was already an accomplished Pandita and one of the abbots of Nalanda Monastery when he met Tilopa, and he was forced to do things that these days Tilopa would surely be arrested for getting into those things, right? So what probably happened was some genius thought, we can systematize this and we can make that hardship not a kind of a chance thing, not so dependent upon this crazy burning desire that only exists in a few people, but we can turn it into a stage by stage way of clearing away obscurations, gathering accumulations, increasing a person's faith, and making them into a practitioner, as opposed to giving them the teachings and seeing what happens. That's what happened in Milarepa, right? I mean, he received the Dzogchen instructions first thing before he met Marpa. And where did he get them? No place. Now, that doesn't mean, and he was as high capacity as anyone is, right? I mean, it's not uncommon. I just saw a video of His Holiness the Dalai Lama talking about Milarepa, and in the middle of his talking about how great he was, he just broke down and started to cry. All Tibetans love Milarepa and his incredible devotion. But I'm not Milarepa. It works better if someone says, hey, here's something you can do. 100,000 prostrations. Sounds like a lot. Break it up over days. And you too can have some of the effects that Milarepa got through going through hellish hardships, through what Naropa got for getting his behind kicked by the hosts of the wedding and so forth, all the stories that I'm sure everyone knows. It is a way of making progress in a systematized way that definitely works, and it turns you into a practitioner, which is what we really want, right? We're kind of
Yeah.
reorienting, as I said in the beginning, from a life where the whole goal is samsaric things to one where Dharma plays a major role. And that is seemingly easiest done through the Ngondro. Can you roll the dice and give it a try doing only the highest practices? Sure. Of course, everyone is welcome to try whatever they want. I know a lot of people who've tried that and they end up returning to do things step by step because most of us are not instantaneous practitioners. Tulku Urgyen said, yeah, there was someone who was like that. His name was Garib Dorje. Since then, very rare. So
And I think at least part of this is that we just don't value things that we don't work for. And just the same way as like when we purchase something, if we spend a lot of money, we're more likely to value that thing than if we were given it for free. And in a similar way, when we work really hard and then we're given the higher teachings, we appreciate them more, take them more seriously. And in my experience, there's more effectiveness because it's similar to me with Keeling Rinpoche. I was given the pointing out instructions immediately, but he also said immediately, now go do Ngondro. And there wasn't any question about it. That was what you did. And I think that this is a really effective method that the Nyingma school has moved towards. It used to be you would do the Ngondro, you would do the Yidam practice, you would do the Solemn practice, and then they would give you the pointing out instructions. And I'm sure there's benefit to that. But the cat's out of the bag in so many ways. We can't hide Dzogchen teachings from people. They're going to encounter them, number one. Number two, there's so much benefit to getting a glimpse of what our true nature is through the pointing out instruction and then developing that further. We can actually bring that pointing out instruction into our practice so that we have less hope and fear, because that can be an obstacle for us as well. If we're really caught in hope and fear about attainment and all of this, thinking that there's some big prize at the end of the tunnel, that too can be a problem. So I think having this taste of what we're working towards, but realizing that taste can open and develop and increase through practice done, and if we do that practice with less hope and fear, with less grasping, then it's even more effective. What do you think about that?
of course, absolutely. Of course, you're right. Yeah, there's a lot to say about this, and we could talk hours and hours about the value. I think it's enough to understand that if you look across the traditions, all the traditions have this. In Tibet, it's very rare that someone does not engage in it. Even a great, almost automatically realized master like Kensei Choki Lodro still made prostrations. So if they have to do it, then thinking, that's not important for me, it might be a little out of alignment.
Yeah, totally. Well, it's been a great introduction to Ngondro. I hope that you see that Joe and I are both very enthusiastic about Ngondro. It's not easy, but as Joe said, you can break it up into chunks and do it over time. And at the end, you can feel really great. Like I just went to an empowerment with Katak Rinpoche, and he said, "Are your knees sore?" We've been doing several empowerments in a row. And he said, make sure you're sitting properly. He said, when I give these empowerments, at the next day, if I sit properly, then I'll feel like I did something great. He said, but if we do it too rigidly, then I just feel sore. So I think that we can apply a similar thing to Ngondro. We work with diligence, but we don't need to harm ourselves. And that way we can feel like we did something great. And that's like you said, like I'm the same way. More than my college degrees and my master's degree, I'm proud that I did the Ngondro. It was more a feeling of accomplishment and value that I'll have with me for the rest of my life. That it really is meaningful. And it wasn't like, of course, I finished the Ngondro and there's a magical thing happened. Nothing happened at all. But I felt ingrained in a way. The Dharma was part of who I was from then on. By then, and that was really beautiful. And so we'll continue forward with a series going through the different parts of the Ngondro, Refuge and Bodhichitta and Prostrations and all those things, and talk a little bit about how to do them and their benefits. And hopefully this brings up your enthusiasm and inspiration around the Ngondro practice. And thank you so much for being with us. As always, please like, subscribe, comment, all those things help our tiny little podcast out. Share it with your friends, share it on social media. It makes a big difference for us. We really appreciate it. And thank you. And we'll see you next time on the Denver Dzogchen podcast.
Thank you.